What is up, everyone? Welcome to HiFi Tutorial, where we talk about everything audiophile. Today we have a very special product. We have the Galion TS120 Special Edition. It was sent to me by Galion Audio. It's hard to believe that it's been a little bit over a month since the Expona 2023 show ended. The show was awesome. It was my first time going to a show like this as media, which is a completely different experience than just attending as a regular attendee like I usually have for the last 3 shows. So in going as media, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people wanted to send me product. But I think one of the most exciting things for me, or one of the things that I was looking forward to the most at the show, was seeing the CSS audio room, which included the new flagship CSS Audio Typhoon. That's what it is. It's not Typhoon, it's Typhon. And the Galion TS120SE. But more than the products themselves, they were put on by Jay and Thomas of Jay's Yagi and Thomas in Stereo fame. And no knock to Jay. I like his videos and Jay's videography is great, but Thomas is my guy. I love Thomas. I have never ever hidden this fact. If you follow me on Instagram, you know I've made many compliments to Thomas. I've bought things that Thomas has recommended. If Thomas is telling me it's good and his friends like it, I'm there like pining, thinking, oh God, do I need to buy that now? Because I do trust Thomas's ears, and I think that he likes a lot of things that I like. So if you don't know, Thomas in Stereo released a audio brand on his own. He released a brand called Galion, and it's in a combination partnership with Doge Audio, who makes a lot of different amplifiers, integrated amplifiers, and was an OEM making amplifiers for much more expensive and European brands for a long time, and now is making their own and is making the Galion. But what makes the Galion product special is that, one, they are voiced by Thomas. Thomas spent 6 months listening to these products and picking out what he liked, what he didn't like, and adjusting the sound to his sound preference, which, again, like I said earlier, I really do trust Thomas's ears, and a lot of things that he likes, I have liked. So to have a product that he has listened to dramatically and changed and been able to dictate how it sounds exactly, it was definitely a very interesting product. Not only that, there's a ton of different features, which we'll get into a little later, but also this product is at a very attractive price point. We have it at about $3,500 US for the regular 120 and $4,500 for the special edition, or the SE. Now, the unit that I had in for review was the 120 SE, the special edition. I didn't have the upgraded tubes, so you can get those as well for an extra $500. I used KT88 tubes that were supplied, and also the supplied 12AX7s and 12AT7s, although I believe I got 6922s, which are a replacement for the 12AX7s, and that was what I stuck with for the review. From talking with Thomas, I know that rolling the KT88s to a KT120, which is an option on this amplifier, is going to give you the largest difference in tonality. Thomas said that the KT88s give a little bit more bass heft, while the 120s are a little bit more smooth and mellow. So if you're in a smaller room, you probably want to opt for the 120s. Now, the special edition and the regular edition of the TS120, the differences there are that the special edition has some upgraded capacitors, but also has different voicing. According to Galion's words, the 120 normal edition is a more fun amplifier that has a little bit more punch in the bass, but the SE is a little bit more hi-fi sounding, if that makes sense, where it is more nuanced in the bass, but has a very luscious and fleshed out mid-range. Let's get more into the specs and features of this integrated amplifier. First, when I took delivery of this thing, it was in this awesome wood and metal box. I thought Thomas was trying to kill me, honestly, because this box was well over 70 pounds. It was extraordinarily hard to get in my car and then get it out and then load it, because this is a tube amplifier. So you have these output transformers that are on one side of the amplifier, and it makes one side of the amplifier incredibly more weighty than the rest of the amplifier. So it's a little awkward to hold, especially because you don't want to hold this amplifier by the sides, because the sides are these wood panels, and if you hold them by the sides, it's possible the wood panels could pop off, and then you're going to drop the amplifier, and your feet are probably underneath that, and that is not going to be a very pretty sight. So the recommendation is to hold it from the front and the back, but most of the weight is in the back, so that makes it a little bit of an awkward lift. And again, we're dealing with something that is around 70 pounds, so it is it is definitely, I would recommend a two-man lift, but being on my own for this pretty much, it was quite the experience to lift that thing. Because of those extraordinarily weighty transformers, you do get a very wide bandwidth of sound, and you also get a very powerful tube amp at that. We're talking two different wattage ratings though, because this amp does bias both into pure Class A as well as Class AB, and you can choose which class you want to run the amp in. Class AB runs a little more powerful, around 50 watts, while Class A runs around 30 watts. Now, given the sensitivity of my Focal Sopra 2s, which I believe is 91 or 92 dB efficient, there was absolutely no problem in running this amp. In fact, 50% volume on the integrated amp was probably at extraordinarily loud levels, and that's in Class A. Switching over to Class AB, extraordinarily loud levels. I'm not putting that lightly. So a lot of power despite maybe what people would consider a low power rating. But switching to Class A from Class AB is not the only feature or change you can make with the sound of this amplifier. In fact, there's a lot more here. So you have the ability to change the feedback in the amplifier. It has an ATB as far as the feedback or tone or kind of those more nuanced change, although the T we'll get into it in a second because that is a very different sound. So on the A side, it adds more feedback, so it reduces the overall noise, while B is a little bit less, so you get more of the kind of tubey sounds, if you will. And I did actually enjoy the B setting more with this amplifier. I do think that the A setting makes it a little bit more transparent, a little bit more sterile sounding, but I did enjoy the little bit of kind of distortion hump and more meaty, kind of more syrupy sounds that I was getting out of the B setting, but I'll get into a little bit more of that a little later. Now the T setting is not for Thomas, it is for tone. And this amp does have tone controls. You can adjust the treble as well as the bass, and this is not in a very extraordinary tone control. I'm not sure what the bass cutoff is, but the treble cutoff I know is at 10 kilohertz, and adjusting that all the way to the max and all the way to the least amount, so on both spectrums, the bass and the treble, I didn't feel like it was just raising that extraordinary. It was more nuanced, but I was also surprised that I didn't feel like I lost like the actual sound of the music. Like it wasn't a extraordinarily exaggerated sound. It was very pleasant and actually did improve some recordings that I could say, oh yeah, I would like it if they had a little more bass, or maybe it does sound better if you add a little bit more treble or even taking away a little bit of treble. But I have experienced some tone controls in the past that I thought were really janky and didn't sound good at all. This was not the feeling at all that I got from the TS120. There are many inputs, although they are all single-ended. There's all RCAs. There's no balanced input or output here. You can't run it as a preamp alone. It has to be run as the full integrated amplifier. You do have a home theater input as well as sub-outs and a tape out. The sub-outs operate both in a mono, or if you're just running one sub, as well as the ability to run two or stereo subs. The amplifier terminals let you select either a 4 ohm or 8 ohm tap. I really preferred the 4 ohm tap on this. I'll get into that a little bit later as well when we talk about sound. You also have a switch for noise reduction, which I think is interesting because probably all audiophiles would say, well, yeah, I'm going to switch noise reduction on. Well, they recommend this if you get a little bit of humming coming out of your speaker to turn that noise reduction on. You also have a ground, but there's no phono in on this integrated amplifier. The ground, I think, is for if you have a speaker like a Tannoy or an audio vector that has that ability for a ground wire to come out of it, you can attach it to this amplifier. One important thing to note as well when biasing into Class A or Class AB is that this amplifier does not auto bias on startup. Instead, it will only bias when you tell it to. Now, the recommendation is to bias probably every couple months or so, But if you change from Class A to Class AV, you do need to bias. Now, you would do this by hitting a change, and then if you just want to bias, you would just hit bias. But if you do want to change classes, you would first change classes and then bias. The lights will turn from red to blue, and then you can remove the change option and go back to listening to the amplifier. The remote's really solid. It's a big chunk of aluminum. It's all CNC'd out. It is pretty bulky and pretty heavy, which feels nice. All the buttons on both the remote and the amplifier are buttons, but they're also just ball bearings, and they kind of just slide in your hand. And I thought that was interesting because one, they do rattle a little bit, but that's only if you give it a shake. But two, I felt like it was almost like an ADHD like kind of toy where someone could just, you know, run their fingers over those ball bearings all day long. I'm sure that that would be awesome for them. Like I said at the beginning, this is a very, very, very heavy amplifier, and it definitely feels very well constructed. The output transformers get extraordinarily hot. There is some vents in the back where you can actually see the output transformers, and it vents out. These aren't potted. It actually is just in the kind of shield that they have, and I still think that it's very well constructed. I'm not normally a fan of the all black look, although I wouldn't say this is an all black amplifier because you do have a mix of different shades of black, kind of a gunmetal or a dark gray in some areas, and it really is a great looking amplifier. Although there are a plethora of blue LEDs on this thing, and you know how I feel about blue LEDs, so I had my blackout little stickers and put that on there to make those go away. I thought this amplifier was very reliable. I've had it now for several weeks and I haven't really had any issues. The only thing I can say, it seems that it is a little bit sensitive to the electricity in the circuit, or something's going on. I'm not entirely sure there, but the story that I have for you is that I plugged the integrated amplifier into a socket here, a different socket than I usually use for my hi-fi equipment, and I was getting a horrible buzzing sound out of the amplifier to the point where I was thinking, is this unit broken? Is something wrong? So I unplugged my Hagel H20. I plugged the TS120 into the outlet that I usually use, which is honestly no different and on the same circuit as the other outlets in this room, and it went away. I don't have any conditioning. I don't have anything special. I have no idea why it doesn't hum on this one outlet, but on all the other outlets in this room, it hummed really bad. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know why that is, but I just kept it on the outlet that did work, and I had absolutely no issues. All right, so let's talk about the sound of the Galion TS120SE integrated amplifier. Sounds really good. I was impressed. I wasn't sure how I would respond to this. I know I heard it at Expono with the CSS Typhon. Okay, Typhon, yes, that's what it is again. And I really, really liked that presentation. I thought that it had an immense amount of bass, and that's typically not what I expect coming out of a tube amplifier. And again, if you remember from the beginning, this is the special edition, the same at Expono was a special edition. This is the one that's supposed to have a more nuanced amount of bass. So I was surprised that there was so much bass presence coming from a tube amplifier at the show. Now bring that into my listening room, what did I get? Same exact reaction when it came to that. It definitely has a more nuanced, a little less punchy bass than my Hagel H20, but still a very surprising amount and surprising quality for a tube amplifier. And I've experimented with quite a few different tube amplifiers, and I always thought the thing that maybe not bothers me, but the thing I can remark most on is just the lack of bass when it comes to those amp designs. That's not the case here with the TS120. Having so many options, I did play around a lot, and like I said, I preferred Class A with the B setting when it came to the overall feedback. I had the ground hum noise reducer set to on because I did get that hum at the beginning. And then I experimented both on the 8 ohm and 4 ohm tap. Now the Sopra 2 is 8 ohm nominal, but the 4 ohm tap sounded substantially better to me than the 8 ohm tap. On the 8 ohm tap, I thought that there was a little bit of etching, a little bit of grittiness on the upper mid-range, somewhere peaking in that 4 kilohertz to 5 kilohertz range. but on the 4 ohm tap that was totally tamed, totally subdued, much more smooth, better sounding, and I think that that was the magic moment for me with the TS120, was switching that tap. Comparatively, Class A sounds more transparent, more wide, deeper soundstage, while Class AB offers a little bit more punch, a little bit more grit in the mid-range and treble. I did like the soundstage presentation of Class A, the transparency, the clarity that I thought was an advantage over Class AB, where it sounded a little less hi-fi, if you will. Like I said, the tone controls, I used them very sparingly here and there, just kind of getting an idea of what they sounded like. But again, I did like it, and it wasn't a tone control that I felt like, oh, this was just slapped on as an afterthought or kind of a gimmick, oh, look at me, I can change the bass and the treble. I think it really was well fleshed out and can add a lot of positive listening experience to your music. Rewinding a little bit, when I first got the TS120 in, I plugged it in, I showed it to my wife, and I asked her what she thought. And she actually said she didn't notice much of a difference versus what we usually listen to. And that's more and more the feeling that I got from the TS120 as time went on, is I don't notice a significant difference versus my Hagel H20. Although maybe that's a bad thing, because, you know, as an audiophile, even a little difference can present itself or be significant to us. And I should probably retract that a little bit, because that little bit of difference, I guess it is pretty significant to me. But we're talking about a $4,500 integrated amplifier versus a $6,500 pure power amplifier that doesn't have tone control, doesn't have the ability to change classes or anything like that. So there are certain features and functions and abilities that the TS120 has over my H20, which I think are very important to note. And like I said at the beginning, one of those things of note is definitely the bass response, bass presence, bass punchiness, where the H20 is certainly more punchy and does go a little bit deeper than the TS120. The TS120 is very close and does present a very plentiful as well as a very high quality bass presentation. The one thing that the TS120 does in its soundstage, and it is extraordinarily well fleshed out, wide, expansive, deep, transparent feeling. The thing that a lot of tube amplifiers, especially, that I've noticed, and tube preamplifiers, is the way that they present the image separation or the instrument separation, where the tube amp has a little bit of smearing. I feel like if you're painting just lines down a canvas, and each line is a different color. On the H20, these colors are very well separated. They have their own column. They don't blend really at all. Where on the TS120, there's a little bit of smearing, a little bit of blending when it comes to those colors. And I think some people would really appreciate that. They like a more smooth transition from one instrument to the other, or having a more homogeneous presentation of the music versus this very separated and individually slotted kind of music presentation, because, to be honest, music typically doesn't sound like that when it's played live or any kind of natural or real presentation of music. It's all kind of blended together. In that regard, the TS120 reminds me a lot of a few years ago when I had the Schkit Freya Plus, and that when the tubes were engaged, that was the one thing I could really remark about that preamplifier, was that there was a little bit of instrument smearing, and it kind of got rid of those walls and that really stark image separation when it came to the soundstage. Presentation-wise, again, the soundstage I feel like is just ever so slightly recessed versus the H20. It's just ever so slightly. The H20, I would say, is pretty neutral to a little bit forward, while the TS120 is pretty neutral to a little bit recessed. And in that regard, I feel like the best way to describe the TS120 versus my Hagel H20 is that I'm at the same exact concert, but just a couple rows back. Nothing dramatic, but just a couple rows back from where I'm typically used to sitting, or where I'm typically used to being at that concert. I think treble was incredibly fleshed out. The mid-ranges were very clear, very transparent, and very lifelike as well. I would say maybe a little bit less lifelike and maybe a little less present than the H20, but still very well fleshed out, very well presented on the treble, to the point where on the treble I really can't think of a really great remark to say versus the H20. I think it's it's so nuanced, or it's so close that I don't even think it's worth mentioning. So really well presented treble, never ever sibilant or harsh in any sort of way. Really nice, really great presentation, and again, with this a little bit of that smearing too, I do think that that is another enticing thing with the treble where maybe it presents itself a little slightly more smooth than the H20. One quick final note on my sound experience with the TS120 is that listening to vinyl versus digital is a different experience. And of course, it's a very different experience. But as you may know, I recently started investing more into my turntable and vinyl setup. And on the 120, I actually do prefer to listen to vinyl over digital when it comes to the H20 comparison. So the 120, I think with the more nuanced bass, with the more live kind of sound, I really enjoyed that when it came to vinyl playback, because when it comes to vinyl, I experience and expect a different experience when it comes to digital. And I felt like that the 120 offered a more live and ethereal kind of sound when it came to vinyl playback, and something that I would want to experience on vinyl playback is that different, more ethereal, more airy, live kind of sound, more, you know, with the little bit of kind of syrupy sound versus the kind of clean, stark, sterile or digital versions. I think that's going to do it for me. A big thank you to Thomas in Stereo, to Galion Audio, although I know that's Thomas and a few more people behind the scenes, but primarily Thomas, for sending me this amplifier. It was a great experience. It was wonderful to meet Thomas at Expona. It was a great experience. Expona was a great experience. I'm really looking forward to next year. And I'll give you also a little tidbit of what's next for Galion that Thomas told me, is that Thomas is currently in research and development of a solid state Galion audio amplifier. And I believe he said that it's not going to be extraordinarily high power, but it is going to be extraordinarily high quality, to the point where he told me that Mr. Kanta, who you may know if you watch Thomas's videos, sold all his other amplifiers because he said, Thomas, this amplifier that you've created is the best amplifier I've ever heard. And all these multi-$1,000, $10,000, $20,000 plus amplifiers, I don't need them anymore because your amplifier is so good. So I really am hoping that when that comes to market, and also it's going to be made and assembled in Canada from what I understand as well. It's not going to be made overseas or, well, in China. It's going to be made in Canada, which is a very interesting proposition as well. I don't know any of the exact details of when, where, what, how, price, etc., but I am very excited to see what that is when it comes to market, and hopefully listen to it for you as well. And being someone that has, again, Focal Sopra 2s, Mr. Kanta, despite his name, has upgraded and moved the Sopra 2s as well. If he was saying that it's good enough to sell all his other amps and this is the best thing he's ever heard on the Sopras, I'm very excited to hear what it can do on my Sopras. But that's the future. That's the future. Again, this is the TS120SE review. It was my pleasure to review this unit. I'm very excited for the future of Galion Audio. And again, at $3,500 to $4,500, this thing is an extraordinary value, really great. I think it's, if you've been thinking about it, or you're on the fence, or you just don't know about Galion and all that, it's just been a really great experience for me, for now one of the longest components I've ever had in this room for auditioning, and I'm still really excited to listen to it every time I do power it up. Like I said, that's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it that thumbs up, subscribe, it really helps out the channel. Check out the links below for other ways to help support the channel, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.